Okay, all you skeptics out there, is the desert principle a useful limit on criminalization in practice? You might think not, right? Just as with the harm principle, you might ask that question about the desert constraint. Will it meaningfully limit criminalization in practice? Couldn't an authoritarian government say that anything it wants to criminalize is so seriously wrongful that it merits a criminal law response? Okay, let me address that question. It's important. The simplest answer to this worry is that the claim is just often not plausible. It might be transparent pretext for going after individuals or groups that the government in question doesn't like, right? To call some conduct a serious, grave moral wrong, seriously culpable, that might just be exaggeration. It might be a transparently weak justification for criminalization if the conduct to be criminalized just doesn't seem very wrongful to regular people. Suppose a wild and crazy government wants to make it a crime, like not to salute the subway driver when you get on and off. So would anyone who lives or wants to live in a free society think that that is a morally wrongful action that expresses deep disrespect for others in society or for deeply held values? I don't think so. Not likely. Okay, you might want more assurance than that, however, right? This takes us right into the messy substantive mire of debating what is or isn't a serious moral wrong, what is or isn't seriously culpable. And it's easy for defenders of a law, a new criminal law, for example, to distract the public away from debating the things that matter. Like, is this conduct harmful? Is it culpable? And instead, they might try to get you to think about tangential issues like whether we like the people who do or don't salute the subway drivers, which group do we identify with more, and so on, right? So we might expect authoritarian governments to put pressure on the wrongness constraint and the desert constraint on criminalization. They'll be likely, or at least tempted, to exaggerate claims of the culpable wrongness of the conduct to be criminalized, just like we can expect them to exaggerate its harmfulness to at least feign consistency with the harm principle. So what can we say in response? This is a tough question. I'm going to say two more things. First, trust the common sense of regular people. Many defenders of the criminal law say that what matters to the desert constraint is what's deemed to be culpable wrongdoing by critical morality. I mentioned this in the last video. In other words, the systematized and theoretically defensible moral principles arrived at through philosophical reflection and argument. Okay, but probably of more practical concern in the present context, if you're interested in actually pushing back against overuse of the criminal law in practice, is not what a bunch of philosophy professors say is wrong or morally wrong, right? But instead, what would have more practical rhetorical force is to show, through empirical studies and public opinion polling, that the proposed new crime would prohibit conduct that very few people in society actually think is seriously morally wrong. A few people might. Public opinion is messy. But if you can show that most people don't think that the conduct to be criminalized really is very culpable, then that lets you say, in the view of lots, or at least most actual people in society, that the proposed new criminal law would violate the desert constraint, which is to say it would unjustly make conduct a crime, even though it's not seriously culpable in a way that people recognize as serious moral wrongdoing. So that's a kind of argument that the legislatures also are going to care about, what people actually think about this conduct. Not least, that's because public opinions will matter to their own political fortunes. All right. Finally, don't forget, here's the second point. Don't forget the point that we saw in connection with the harm principle. Even if a very determined government can find ways to get around the desert constraint by creatively arguing that the conduct to be criminalized is culpably wrong, the point is to make it harder for them to do that, to impose costs that slow or inject friction into the process of criminalizing innocent conduct. What the desert constraint amounts to at the end of the day is a demand that the legislature should show that the conduct to be criminalized either is clearly and uncontroversially morally culpable in a serious way, so that we satisfy the desert constraint, or else, if there's only a weak basis for thinking the conduct is culpable, then they have to show and find some alternative basis besides moral wrongfulness for supporting criminalizing that conduct. Like maybe it's very harmful in tangible ways. Okay, recall that to command the support of a wide range of lawmakers, assuming they're acting in good faith and not just craven yes men supporting whatever the government wants to do, there has to be a strong and widely convincing basis for using the criminal law, since it's such a powerful legal tool. But if there's only a weak case that the conduct is culpable, then The legislature can't claim the proposed law is uncontroversially permissible. If it's a borderline case of the conduct maybe being culpable, maybe not, then you got to find an alternative basis for the law that is clear and convincing, like that it would clearly reduce harm. That might work. That might justify it. Okay, so the desert constraint basically says to lawmakers, either show us that the conduct to be criminalized clearly and uncontroversially is seriously culpably wrong, or else provide some other case for thinking that the law has a powerful justification of the kind that could command widespread support from the population and lawmakers. Okay, so it's a demand to either show that the desert constraint is clearly and convincingly satisfied, or to show that there's an alternative basis rooted maybe not in culpability so much as something else like harm reduction. So that may not be a perfect guarantee against the criminal law, against criminal law overreach, right? It's not to perfectly immunize ourselves from improper uses of the criminal law, but it helps. It puts those who want to pursue an expansive criminal law that threatens our freedoms more on the defensive. It makes them work for it if they really want to pass the new criminal law that's only questionably culpable, that may not be obviously culpable. They've got to work for it if they really want it. That's probably the most a principle like this can do. And although it's not a silver bullet in the fight against illiberal criminal law, I think it's a defensive maneuver that's well worth pursuing. Again, that's just me, but think about it. See what you think. I think it helps.